Possible, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause. Let's welcome the Senior Minister.
My colleague, Dr. Tinjesi, Dr. Andani Al-Hassan, Nanade, captains of industry, distinguished bankers, ladies and gentlemen. The topic we are to discuss is unlocking economic growth through manufacturing, cost, quality, and competitiveness. If we were to take any of these, competitiveness can take us half a day. We were to take manufacturing, the same. But we've put all together, which is good, because they are related. In fact, you cannot be talking about manufacturing specific without looking at certain things which is the environment for manufacturing. And I want to underscore that. Manufacturing can never be on its own, and it will never be on its own. Manufacturing thrives within a certain environment. And this is very, very important. A new word has developed in the World Bank vocabulary, which takes its root from Ghana. Reversibility of the economy. The World Bank could not understand, and they still do not understand, when the economy of Ghana, growing at 9.2% GDP, without oil, we find oil, it goes up to 14% naturally, because there's a new input, and declines to 3.7%. What is the cause? How does Ghana manage the economy such that this reversibility cannot exist? It's now a big topic being discussed at the IMF and the World Bank, because the figures don't add. So it is very important to take manufacturing in its proper environment. When His Excellency President Nana Akufo-Addo was being inaugurated, in his speech, he talked about his transformational agenda is anchored on the following thematic areas. His transformational agenda is anchored on these 4 thematic areas. 1, microeconomic stability and debt sustainability. You cannot have a manufacturing sector without microeconomic stability and debt stability. As a country, you can't. And the fact that all the industries Dr. Tinjesi mentioned had collapsed, it's mostly because of the environment they operated were very hostile. They could not compete. So there was something fundamentally wrong with the management of the microenvironment. Therefore, for every government, it is a must that you keep a very stable microeconomic environment to enable the sectors to grow. If you take a fish from the waters and bring it to the land, the environment, it dies because it's not in the right environment. In the same way, if you put a mammal into water and keep it down, it will die. And therefore, this government has consciously decided that we must make sure that the microeconomic environment is stable. That your inflation is right, your growth is right. The cost of money can only be right if your inflation is right. And Sister Sylvia gave you figures of the prime rate of her bank and of the banking industry. It's only when the cost of money becomes realistic, through prudent management of the microenvironment, that you assist industry to survive. As an engineering student, I worked in a number of assembly plants, vehicle assembly plant Tema. We're assembling Jeeps. I worked at Tomos in Kumasi. There are no more. Because the so-called tariff protection has a limit. We must also protect the consumer. And it is the responsibility of government to also protect a consumer. If you are going to make an item, say a bicycle in Ghana, at a cost of 10,000 cedis, and somebody can bring it here at 1,000, you mean we should put a barrier, duties on the import, such that you can sell yours at 10,000, so that we cannot bring in those which are also produced at 1,000. That will be counterproductive, because then you are not also protecting your consumers. So as Doc said, you've got to look at all these things. The second thematic area Nanado mentioned was infrastructure development. And if you listen to Sister Sylvia very attentively, even the little infrastructure chaos in certain industrial areas is creating confusion for manufacturers. She's talking about the government fixing roads in certain areas, and I completely agree with her. Infrastructure is key to manufacturing and industrialization. So you cannot take manufacturing in isolation. Infrastructure includes power. What happened to us a few years ago? Could any industry survive under the quality of power that was being turned out by the country? The Dumso literally undermined the competitiveness of manufacturing in this country. And therefore, a government must pay attention to an important infrastructure like power. Must not only be available, but available continuously and at available price. So you see the need for the policy to support manufacturing. And at our first cabinet, we decided that we should put an end to Dumso, whatever it costs, to make sure that there's continuous power. We should do it. And it has happened. Then followed the third thematic area of the president's areas of concern. The next one is about the manufacturing, what he called accelerated industrial development. So that the industrial development must fit within a system. And the last but not the least of the four is also agricultural transformation. As Dr. Tinjesi rightly pointed out, manufacturing must satisfy certain things. People must look for certain things to go into manufacturing. One is market. And therefore, import substitution was the vogue in the 50s and 60s. We are importing so much of this, and therefore, let's produce for the market. We also know that the basic principle of economics, which was true yesterday, true today, and will be true tomorrow, is you identify your own advantages in relation to the others, so that you develop your advantages to your advantage. Therefore, your raw material becomes important. How many drinkers of cocoa can grow cocoa in the world? So where our cocoa is consumed, they can't grow it there. So Ghana has that advantage. And therefore, agricultural transformation is key, because it's also going to be the source of raw material to feed industry or manufacturing. So you find out that the government then quickly thinks through let us anchor to these thematic areas, one district, one factory. This one district, one factory must, of course, be based primarily on raw materials within that catchment area and all markets. So it will be substitution at the same time, identifying your own advantage as a country, as a manufacturer, as a producer. Has the policies we pursued generally produce the desired results? And the answer is basically yes. It is not easy to get the rules of the game right. And Dr. Tinjesi kept on talking about indiscipline. It's a very nice euphemism for corruption. I mean, what are you calling indiscipline? What is indiscipline? If somebody will classify stainless cutlery as plastic cutlery, what is the inducement for anybody to do that? If somebody would write 10,000 pieces and make it 1,000 pieces to reduce the duty to be paid, what is the inducement to do that? No. I wouldn't call it indiscipline. I would think that it is corruption. And this has been the bane. Now, when we try to put some, now use this word, discipline at the harbor, people start complaining that duties have gone up. In the first budget, we rather reduced taxes. 12 taxes were removed. No additional duties were imposed on anything. But when people started paying the right type of duty on the items, when the misclassification started being identified, people will naturally have to pay a little bit more. So people come to me and complain and say, tell me which duties have gone up. When duties go up through a budget, it's discussed and it's converted into law in Parliament. Now give me one. And nobody is able to give me anything because the duties haven't gone up. But what has happened is that now the misclassification is going down. The counting is getting right. And therefore, people are paying more than they used to pay. And that should continue so that we protect those who are producing. We protect those who are manufacturing. It is very important. The other policy is also the cost of money. If manufacturers in Ghana are going to borrow at, say, around 30%, as Sylvia mentioned, it's now coming down. But their competing neighbors, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo, they are in the same friend zone, and their interest rate is 4.5 to 5%. So immediately, our producers have a problem of cost. The financial cost of their operations is just too high. It's not competitive. If you are going to sell their products in Nigeria, and they are borrowing at 4.5, and you are borrowing at 25, then you have a problem. And therefore, the central bank is putting in place measures to bring down the cost of borrowing. And Sister Sylvia gave you figures to show that indeed interest rate is dropping, and it will continue to drop. Indeed, that arbitrariness of bankers assessing their own interest rate will soon be history. Because elsewhere in the world, interest rate is determined by certain agreed formula within the banking fraternity. They say LIBOR plus 2%. Everybody knows LIBOR is a constant figure at any point in time. So if you are adding 2 to 8, it can be 10 and not more. So Bank of Ghana is working such that the prime rate of the central bank as a percentage will be the interest rate prevailing, and every bank will be forced to use that interest rate because it is determined within the banking industry. So the policy is also to bring down the cost of money. So directly, you are impacting positively on manufacturing. This is the only way you can make the manufacturing exist. If you allow these policies to be haywire, it will not work. We must create the microenvironment to promote manufacturing. And I think this government is doing exactly that. People may ask, what has happened to the 1D, 1F in terms of actual implementation? So I just talked to the Ministry of Trade and Industry yesterday to find out what is happening to our 1D, 1F. Not only the policy, but in terms of implementation. The policy has come up all right. Now, I'm reliably informed that so far, the ministry has received 781 expressions of interest, out of which 632 have been reviewed, and 332 are currently being processed for financial support. So far, 15 projects have been approved for implementation under the 1D, 1F. And we are happy to say that a number of banks have shown keen interest in the support. We expect that by end of this year, 50 of those which have been appraised will be in production. GCB has agreed to make available to support the 1D, 1F, 1 billion cedis. UBA has agreed to support by 880 million, ADB 200 million, Exim Bank 103 million, UMB 440 million, SGSSB 25 million. We continue to count. Other banks are discussing with us. These support will be appraised by the banks themselves. It is not the government that will impose the disbursement of these monies on the projects. The projects will have to be appraised by the banks and let them be bankable by the definition of the various banks. Because the 1D, 1F is all in the domain of the private sector. It is not in the domain of government. What the government has decided is that the government will absorb 50% of the interest rate on these 1D, 1F companies, so that determining what is bankable will be done by the professionals. When you have been appraised, you have been shortlisted, you have qualified, the cost of money to you will be shared between the government and yourself. We will subsidize the interest rate. By doing that, you are allowing the professionalism to take its course, and you are making money cheaper for manufacturing. We hope that this will do well. We also find out that a number of companies, because of hostile environment, which have been mentioned both by Sylvia and Dr. Atinjesi, have gone into difficulties. So the Minister of Trade and Industry talks about stimulus package. The stimulus package is not to use good money to chase bad money. No. The stimulus package is to identify those companies which have run into difficulties for reasons perhaps not due to them, but due to the environment. So when you analyze this, you find out that most of them have run into liquidity problems because of your currency fluctuations over a period. They can no more sustain. They don't have the liquidity. So once you are identified and you qualify that because of XYZ, otherwise you are forever bankable, then you qualify to also enjoy the stimulus package. And the government has made an allocation of 236 million cedis, nearly $50 million, to support the stimulus package. The Investor Merchant Bank has so far disbursed $2 million to the aluminum industry. So far, Exim Bank has disbursed $5.1 million to the pharmaceutical and textile industries. And I've been very specific because these are the areas which have benefited from it. Pharmaceuticals and textiles, so far, 5.1 million. We have not got any specific sectors with preferential treatment. What we have is the analysis to show that the project is fundamentally viable and that is bankable, and they've gone into difficulties more through environmental influences rather than through their own thing. We must always make sure that management is good. Corporate governance is very good. And Bank of Ghana is sanitizing the banking sector. And you all know it, you all hear what is going on. And has set a new capital-based limit, which must be met by end of the year of 400 million cedis. Many of the banks are meeting it. I'm reliably informed that some of the banks are coming together, according to Bank of Ghana, to form single banks to meet this head, and this is good news. It's better to own 50% of 1,000 than to own 50% of nothing. And we have had a problem, a traditional problem of people wanting to own 100% of something themselves. Sometimes it's better to own a fraction of something that is very viable. Because if your company is making a profit of 10 million and you owe 10%, you at least get 1 million, isn't it? So it's better to talk about viability rather than size of the equity, rather than me alone. So we should all learn to join hands when it becomes necessary. We're trying to also promote entrepreneurial innovation programs with the NIB, the Incubation and Business Support Program, aimed at training young entrepreneurs, and we've received over 7,000 applications for financial support. And we are providing these incubation support for smallholder companies. Of course, you've heard about the National Public Sector Reform Strategy. I believe very strongly that our public sector should think that the purpose of their existence is to support the growth of the private sector and the citizenry. If the public sector does not think this way, then there's a problem. And therefore, when I look at the public sector reform strategy program, which had been approved by the previous cabinet, I studied it, it was good. What was missing was making the public sector a function to support the private sector and citizenry. It is extremely important that the mentality of public sector is not to create bottlenecks for the private sector. The public sector should at all times be ready to support the private sector. Because if we continue to talk about the private sector being the engine of growth, and the public sector, that is to give it that push, is creating bottlenecks through what, in quotes, indiscipline, then we have a problem. And therefore, the reform, which will be launched on the 8th, has changed in focus. Now we're thinking seriously that the mentality of the public sector should be to support the private sector and naturally the citizenry. If you think, as the president has come out with that vision, Ghana beyond aid, what is really coming to your mind? You are tackling the dependency syndrome of the whole country. You want Ghana to efficiently and effectively use its resources and not depend on others to even carry out its primary functions. All policies we've put in place, we try to hammer these 4 thematic areas. And within this is the accelerated industrial development, which is manufacturing. But as I said, we need the relevant environment for manufacturing to exist. And manufacturing, indeed, has gone through hell in this country because of the management of the macroeconomic environment. The currency instability itself has been one of the sole sources of the death of many of the manufacturing industries. Because no matter which way you go, you need to bring in imported items. And you cannot talk about exchange rates, which change overnight in big percentages. We all need to work such that we create environment for manufacturing to survive. We create environment for agriculture to survive, to be a source of providing, when necessary, raw materials for manufacturing. We create the environment for infrastructure to develop in tandem with manufacturing so that your power is reliable, your road network is good, and you can compete not only within ECOWAS, but even outside ECOWAS. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. A big round of applause for the senior minister. Hello? Okay. So we are going to have a conversation, and there's a lot that has been said. It's really a lot to chew on, and so I want to today limit the conversation on this side of the room, and rather ask my audience to ask all the questions, because I know there are businesses, representatives from industry. You don't always get the senior minister, and so once you do, I'm not in industry, so I don't want to limit my questions from this side. I'll probably not be asking the questions that you came here to ask, and so I want you, and I want the ushers please to go around, microphones, one on this side and the one on that side. You raise your hands, you of course mention your name and where you're coming from, and then you ask a question. There's a lot that has been said here today, and there's a lot to digest and probe. But I trust that you have far better questions than I can ever bring up, and so I'll rely on my audience to do that. But I will start off with a brief question after this brief commercial break.